Wonderful. This is my pleasure, my treat. Oh, was I caught on the thing?
There we go.
15 years ago, I was a youth pastor, and I used to show videos of Amina to my students. This is a dream come true for me.
It's a serendipitous meeting for us.
Unbelievable.
You know, because we're both doing really different things
Can't believe
from
it's
what
happening.
we were doing at that time of life.
I'm starstruck.
So it's good. We're going to get to be in conversation, and maybe we can talk a little bit about that actually.
Talk about anything
Kind
we
of
want, right?
how,
Anything
you
we
know,
want.
How like you navigate that nuance. So this is a conversation. So we want to get your questions. We want to hear from you so that Joshua might be able to answer. I'm sorry about this house music up here, y'all. We done tried to tell them to turn it down, but the venue is actually open to the public. So there's a room in here that's open to the public. So you just might have to like jam a little bit while we're, you know, they could have given us minimalist on that, you know, like less of that.
Wish I had matched all the colors
You
that
know?
you're matching.
Let's
the
try
lips
this next
and
time.
the
You know,
eyeshadow
it's time
and
for
the hair.
brightness. People need a bold thing. It's not time for muted colors today.
Genius.
So I think maybe it's a good segue since you brought up, you know, you had this whole other life, right? And I think there are quite a few of us that have a bit of that story before we get into how you became a minimalist, a person who really believes that this is something we should all be doing, right? But I think a lot of us have like 2, 3, 4 different lives sometimes that we feel we've lived. We have an era of time that we may have worked for someone else. And then you had this era of time you worked for yourself. You know, you have all these different times of life that you would never have thought at that time that you'd be doing this now. So what would you say was a part of this evolution, I guess if I could use that word, from this life you once had where you were a youth pastor to students, and now you have a media company and you're helping people declutter their lives and not just their things.
Okay.
Like, talk about that.
So I'm glad you started here. So I pastored for 15 years, and I love it because as soon as I get to say that, then I get to say spiritual stuff the rest of the time. So no matter where I am, like once I say I was a pastor, then anything else I can say because I was a pastor. So this is what things used to mean to me, or this is how I see things. But anyway, so now I get to go back to that if I need to. I pastored for 15 years. I loved pastoring. My grandfather was a pastor. My dad was a banker. I went to college to become a banker. When I had 3 semesters left is when I felt God calling me into being a youth pastor. And so I went into it, and I loved it. It was all that I ever wanted to do was be a pastor. As I mentioned, my grandpa's a pastor. He always says, if God called you to be a pastor, don't stoop to be a king. And it was always very true to me. I found minimalism 11 years ago, and I started blogging about it and writing about it as a hobby. It was something I was very passionate about. It was something that I was seeing. Do you want me to do something? No? Okay. It was something is that close enough? Did I get it? It was something that I saw resonating with people. I seemed to have a voice that people were drawn to in terms of seeing the benefit of owning less. And I never tried to become a full-time writer. Most bloggers' dream is to quit their day job and become a blogger, but that was never me. I loved doing what I was doing. I didn't do it for the money. I did it because I got to speak into people's lives and make a difference in people's lives. But the more I was writing, the more the blog was growing and my influence was growing and opportunities and responsibilities were growing. And at one point, I felt like I had 2 full-time jobs. And honestly, the moment was the church was paying my mortgage, but all of my free time, I was thinking about how do I introduce minimalism to more and more people. And I said, maybe it's not fair that the church is covering all my expenses while this is where I'm spending a lot of my creativity and passion. And so it was about a 3.5-year process, like just a very spiritual process of, okay, is this really what I want to go and do? I wasn't making a lot of money online when I made the transition. Actually, I was making way less online, which I'm actually a little bit thankful about. It was never where I was drawn to do it for the money. It was, I think I can have as significant an influence on people's lives over here as I can over there. Maybe even more. I mean, there were, I don't know, a dozen youth pastors in my city and no one writing about minimalism. So it was like, maybe I can have more of an influence over there. So it's good. I've never wanted to be motivated by money, and I don't know if I've always held true to that, but I've never wanted that to be the motivation in my life, and I hope it hasn't been, and I do like that when I was transitioned, I was making so much less, because I knew it wasn't for the financial reasons.
Talk to us about, was there a moment or a process or period of time that led you to really become interested in minimalism? Because I think when we start thinking about life in a more holistic way, I feel like minimalism is included in that, right? And so when we go into that, it requires a change of our lifestyle. It requires a change of some things that may have been conveniences or comforts to us. So what was there a catalyst moment that made you go, I want to really evaluate this in my life?
Yeah. No, there was a singular moment. I spoke over there earlier today and gave the longer story. I'll give you the short version. Saturday morning, 10 years ago, I was out cleaning my garage. My 5-year-old son, I was hoping was going to help me, but he soon ended up in the backyard begging me to play with him. Hours later, I'm working on the same garage. Happened to talk to my neighbor. Short conversation, but she makes the statement. She says, that's why my daughter's a minimalist. She keeps telling me I don't need to own all this stuff. And I looked across the yard, and in my driveway was this pile of dusty, dirty things I'd spent all day taking care of. And out of the corner of my eye, I could see my son swinging alone on the swing set in the backyard. And suddenly had this realization. I knew my possessions weren't making me happy. At least we would all say our possessions aren't making me happy. But in that moment, the juxtaposition of my son alone and this big pile of dirty, dusty stuff, I realized not only were my things not making me happy, my things were actually taking me away from the very thing that did bring me happiness in life. And not just happiness, but purpose and meaning and significance and joy. And I'm pretty convinced that most people will at least have a moment, a change where they begin to pursue a minimalism in life, that this is the foundational truth, where they realize that not only are their possessions not making them happy, their possessions are actually taking them away from happiness. This is the moment when people see it and realize it, and whether it's cleaning out your garage, whether it's a friend of mine printed off his 10-year Amazon record, and that was the moment. I can't believe I've spent all this money on Amazon. What are some other stories? Just different times I've spoken and people came up to me, and so there seems to be that moment where our possessions actually are keeping us from the life we want to be living.
Yeah. Any questions out here that you have? Yeah. Oh, and let me say, because we're recording, ask your question, but I'm going to repeat it here, just so our people watching will be able to know what you ask. So go ahead.
So I was there earlier when you talked, and I think you said you guys kind of got rid of 60% of everything. What was the criteria? Did y'all have a set of questions you would answer on whether or not to keep something or give it away?
So when making more minimalist decisions, what is the criteria for how you decide what you keep and what you declutter? Yes?
I did not have a set of questions that I was asking. There were different things that I was thinking and some different questions that I've developed along the way, but they fall under what is really the most important question, and that is, does this item help me fulfill my purpose in life? So Marie Kondo has made a living having people ask the question, does this item spark joy? And it's been helpful for a lot of people, and I'm okay with the question. If it helps people own less, I'm for whatever helps people own less. But I don't think it's the right question that we should be asking. Like, most people buy stuff because they hold it in a store and think that it's going to spark joy, right? The real question we need to be asking is, what do I want to do with my life? What do I want to accomplish with my life? What is important to me in my life? And then what things do I need to own in order to do that? And so it's going to look different. A minimalist mechanic is going to own something different than a minimalist farmer or a minimalist painter or a minimalist teacher, a minimalist writer. Someone who has a family of 6 is going to own something different than a single person in their 20s, someone who lives in the country, different than the city. So that's the overarching question. I think the general questions are very helpful. Do I need this? I think why do I have it is an important question that I encourage people to ask. I could look at the clothes in my closet and look at the shirts that I don't wear and be like, okay, so like, why do I have this? Oh, I remember this one, it was on clearance. I remember this one, it was the style back then. Those are some of the reasons I bought it, not necessarily because I needed it. What would I use if I didn't have this? I think can be a helpful question to ask. There's one other point. Maybe the thing that I encourage people to start with is people can start with duplicates. It's a great place to get started. You all need a spatula, but I got it. Everyone needs a spatula, but you don't need 8 spatulas, right? Like, you need towels, but you probably don't need as many as you have in your home. So what are some duplicate items that I can remove along the way as well?
This is a crowd mic? Yes.
Cool.
I won't have to make sure I'm translating accurately. So we're going to take questions, and now you can speak from the microphone. JM. Okay, anybody else have questions for Joshua? Or things you want to talk about as it relates to minimalism? Yeah.
So my question is, how did you get your wife on board? And what do you say to couples who might not be seeing it the same way?
Yeah. Well, I've never met a couple where they don't see things the same way. So I have no way to answer that. So very fortunately, my wife was on board. Oh, pardon me. My wife was on board, maybe not to the same extent that I wanted to be. So we got rid of 50% of our stuff, and I'm like, this is great, let's keep going. And then that's when I started to get pushback, and she's like, I think we're at a pretty good point now, right? Like, what does minimalism really mean and look like until you get into it? So the first half went great, and then I wanted to keep going, and she didn't, and so we had to figure that out and compromise and figure out what it was going to look like for us. I could always focus on my own things. I could get rid of my own clothes. I get rid of my own tools. I get rid of stuff in my office. So there was a lot of things that I could still work on myself. As far as what advice do I give? Well, number one, because there's always varying degrees. And I think, generally speaking, most couples, there's 3 types of couples that you get. There's the couple where they're both on board with the idea, but maybe to the extent isn't exactly the same. There's the couple where the husband is okay with the wife doing it, but doesn't want to do it with their own, or the wife is okay with the husband, but they don't want to do it themselves. And then the third hardest case is where one partner wants to do it and the other one doesn't want them to get rid of even their own stuff. Like, that's the most difficult one to navigate. But any of the either two, the first two, I tell people to focus on their own things, like get rid of your own stuff. That's what you need to do anyway. It's always easier to see everyone else's clutter than it is to see your own. I was speaking in Orlando one time, and a guy came up to me, and he said, hey, I love what you had to say. I'm the minimalist in my family. I can't get my wife on board. So we talked it over. About 5 minutes later, his wife came up to me, and they hadn't talked. And the wife said, hey, I'm the minimalist in the family. I can't get my husband on board. What would I tell him? And it's so true, right? Like, I have my stuff, and I can't figure out why my wife needs all the stuff that she has, and she can't figure out why I have all the stuff that I have. So it's very easy to see everyone else's clutter than it is to see your own. So start with your own stuff. Look for any common spaces of agreement. Hey, can we all agree that this closet needs some work, that the garage needs some work, and maybe you can't get specifics about what to get rid of, you can at least get agreement that something needs to change in these different spaces. Next, the way you have this conversation with your spouse is so important. Most of the conversations we have about clutter and possessions are when we're really frustrated. We can't find what we're looking for. The closet doesn't close. Everything falls on top of us when we open the closet. Or we get the credit card statement and why are you spending so much money, right? Like, these conversations happen out of frustration rather than, hey, like, let's go out for dinner and let's have a rational conversation about what's important to us. Where are we going with our life? Are we using the resources in the best way possible? Are there some changes that we can make? And then when you have that conversation, you need to do it in a way that resonates with them. There's usually a reason why people are drawn to minimalism. If you're the homemaker in your house, then it's usually, I'm just sick of cleaning up all the time, and the idea of cleaning less, I'm drawn to that. But if you're not the person in your house that does a lot of the housework, then you got to look for a different angle as to what would resonate with them. Hey, if we owned less stuff, we'd be able to get ahead financially, or we'd be able to go on more trips, or maybe we could talk about retiring early in the future, or you could work less. Like, what is it that is going to draw them to the lifestyle? Because it's probably going to be different than what drew you to. And then always patience, humility, love. I always tell people, it's very likely that there's something your spouse wants you to change about yourself. How well is that going, right? Like, so none of us are perfect, and we appreciate each other. And so that was a long answer. We're going to go through this time quick.
Yeah, right here, and then I'll make sure we get you.
Yeah.
So, well, thank you for being here.
Yeah.
Question is basically all at once or long process. Like, how long does it take to actually feel like, yeah, we're minimalist now?
Yeah. Very different for different people. I mean, there are some people who can rent a dumpster and get rid of everything in a weekend. They're very few and far between, but some people can do it. For us, it took about 9 months. It took about 3 months to get through, like, the lived-in areas of our home, living room, bedroom, kitchen, those types of areas. But 9 months if you want to add in garage and basement and home office. The process that I find to be most effective for the most number of people is to work through your home easiest to hardest. People think about minimizing or decluttering and like, yep, I got to go through my garage. And then they spend an hour and a half in their garage and they don't make any progress or can't see any progress. And they're like, this ain't going to work. But if you go spend an hour and a half in your living room, like, you can probably finish the living room. Okay? We had magazines and DVDs and CDs and decorations, and there were toys that were supposed to be in a different space. And there was, like, it didn't take that long to get that stuff out of that room. And I sat down in the room, and I'm like, man, this feels great. It's like air's able to move. It's like energy's able to flow through this space. It's less distracting. It's more calming. Where else can I have this feeling in my home? And so I went to the next room. Like, the bedroom tends to be an easy space for a lot of people. So easiest to hardest, because then by the time you get to the garage, you're like, okay, I've seen owning less beneficial in all these other places. Let's get through this project. So 3 months living spaces, 9 months to do the whole home. We moved into a smaller house 3 years later and got rid of even more stuff when we made that change. And then seasons of life change. My kids were young, and now they're teenagers, and so that means we own different things. And so I think it's a constant changing.
Hi. So my question is, what are the now that you're living in this lifestyle, what are the benefits that you were surprised by, and then what are the difficulties that you were surprised by?
Very few difficulties. I don't want to be rose-colored glasses, but I can't think of any significant problem or difficulty that has come from owning less stuff. Maybe I have to make a phone call to my neighbors every Halloween that they would bring over their folding table for the party in the garage. Like, I borrow more things from some of the neighbors, but I don't think that's a difficulty. I think it brings us closer together, so not a lot of difficulties. Benefits, I mean, I go through benefits, more time available, more money, less stress, more generosity, more gratitude, more contentment, fewer distractions, better example for my kids, better life for the environment, less comparison I make with other people, able to own higher quality things, right? Being cheap and being minimalist aren't necessarily the same thing. Man, so many of the...
That's a key point. That's a major key you just said right there.
Yeah. So, I mean, some people become minimalist because they're cheap, but you don't have to be. If I'm going to... I mean, you know, if I'm going to own fewer things, it means I can own... If I don't need 5 watches, I can have one really nice watch or whatever it might be on down the line. Actually, we moved from a 2,300 square foot home into like a 1,600 square foot home, and we actually like upgraded our home. Like, our home was higher quality. It was smaller but higher quality, but it was the same price as the larger house. And so anyway.
That was helpful.
Good.
That was helpful right there, because
Yeah.
I think sometimes minimalism feels like gluten-free to me a little bit, where like when people say they have an allergy, people's minds are always like, oh, it's gluten, you know, and it's like, you know, there's like 1,000 allergies to things. Like, it could be gluten, but it could be grass, it could be all these things. And I think when we think about minimalism, or some of us have this like sort of hippie commune idea of things. And I think just even hearing you say that says that minimalism just can look differently for different people, different families, how that could work, right?
Yeah. Yes, and minimalism isn't about subtraction. Like, minimalism is about what you add into your life because you've removed all the distractions. So before I went up in the afternoon, I was sitting with someone at a table, and she's like, oh, so you like a minimalist in all areas of life? And I'm like, I don't really know what that means. I'm like, I minimize my possessions, I minimize my distractions so that I can have more of the things in my life that I do want, like more time with my family, more money to give to things that I believe in, more time for things that believe in, more focus on the things that actually matter. I give up the distractions so I can elevate those things in life that are most important to me. It's more about what you add into your life. And honestly, more money, more time, less stress. Like, I'm pretty convinced that everything people want in life, they can find owning fewer possessions. Like, it's on the other side of overcoming the desire and the need to always buy more and more and more.
Yeah. Other questions? Yeah.
So my mental roadblock in getting rid of things is the mights. This might fit someday. I might need this specific greeting card pack someday, like that sort of thing. How do you get past that? Because I feel like, well, it'll cost me more money to have to replace this, so I don't want to get rid of it.
Yeah.
But how does that work?
Yeah. My favorite way to answer that question is, I think you're asking the wrong might. Rather than, okay, what if I get rid of this and I might need it in the future? What if you flipped it around and thought to yourself, what am I maybe missing out on because I'm keeping all this stuff? And most of the things that we end up needing can usually be found at a neighbor's house. Like honestly, like Whatever you need, your next door neighbor probably has. Greeting cards, that's maybe not a perfect example, but they'd probably have one. I mean, they probably have a pack, certainly a gift bag they have if you can borrow one from some people. I find that a lot of things that we think we have to have this one item to solve a problem. Dave Bruno wrote his book, The 100 Thing Challenge, and his subtitle was Reduce, Reuse, Rejigger. And it was very interesting because it was a kind of a surprise to him. He got down to owning just 100 things, and he found that a problem would arise, and he would think, oh, I wish I had this item in order to solve that problem. He said, but most of the time, I just found a different way to solve the same problem. Like, how many things in your kitchen can be solved with a fork, like a spoon and a knife? Like, we have all these gadgets, and honestly, if in a desperate need, like most things we can find a way around. That being said, I think we can be smart. Like, what are the chances that I'm going to use this? If I use something every year and it's really expensive and my neighbor doesn't have one, then you keep it. But honestly, our folding table, we have a Halloween party every single year, and we ask our neighbor every single year for their folding table, and we don't have much of a need for it other than that. So, but usually I think we're missing out on more by holding on to stuff than the one or two things that we're going to have to end up replacing.
Other questions?
Yeah. What about minimalization of media of all kinds?
What was the last part?
Of media of all
Yeah.
kinds,
Oh,
both
of all
entertainment and social media,
Yeah.
all of that.
Ooh, it's parts of this conversation where I'm like, you know what, Joshua, you got
How we
this.
doing on time?
I'm gonna go ahead. Let me go ahead and go.
Okay, so what I found was I started minimizing possessions. This is what I started with. I found that what it is essentially about intentionality. So no one sets out in life and says, I just want to spend my life buying as much junk as I possibly can, right? Like, that's no one's goal in life, is to own a big pile of junk in their driveway, or very few people's goal in life. But I ended up there. And I had to ask myself, like, how did this happen? Like, it wasn't an intentional way to live, but society was doing it, and so I did it. Everyone else was doing it, so I started doing it. Advertisements convinced me I needed it, and so I started doing it. And so minimalism was about embracing intentionality in the things that I own. I soon found, actually the story goes, we started in May, my birthday was in December, and my wife started asking me what I wanted for my birthday. And I'm like, I have no idea what I want for certainly not another tie. I just got rid of 12. Like, I don't know what I want for my birthday. A gym, a Planet Fitness opened up right by our house one time, and I was driving by, and I'm like, I would like a membership to the Planet Fitness. No clutter. I freed up some time. I can get in shape. So that's why I asked for my birthday. And then after about a month of going to the gym and coming home and having chips and soda, I'm like, this is kind of dumb. Like, why am I doing this? And so I started eating healthier as well. And what I found was, because I embraced intentionality in the things that I owned, it started to spill over into the habits I was embracing with my life, the food that I was eating. Like, intentionality can be embraced in all these different areas of life. So to answer your question, so media then becomes, so what helps me, because the same filter we begin to apply. Like, what media helps me be the person that I want to be, and what is just me wasting time that I could put towards other things. Now, rest is important, and downtime is important, and the value of story is important. So that, like, you wouldn't say, I don't watch any television. Like, none of that means anything to me. And social media, I mean, I live my life online. So Facebook and Twitter and connecting with people, like, it can be a platform for connecting with people. But it can also become a big pile of stuff that's actually keeping us from the things that matter most. And finding that isn't always easy, but I think the same principles apply. So I don't know if that answered your question or if I just got to say. Oh, how many apps do I have on my phone? More than a lot. I have a lot. So in relation to that, man, this guy accosted me on a bus one time. And he was like, aren't you a minimalist? Why do you have a smartphone? And I'm like, who are you? But then I was like, look, technology, I'm not against technology in any way. Like, technology makes minimalism more possible today than ever before. I mean, in my phone, I can have books and movies and photos and maps and credit cards, and it's like a Mary Poppins handbag, right? Like, I don't need to own a whole bunch of things because technology can do so much of that for me today. That being said, it can become as much a distraction as it can be a tool. So how many? I think I flipped through 3 different screens. I don't use folders, so I don't know, 3 different screens to get to things.
There might be people like sitting next to you who would have more than that.
Yeah, sure. I don't know. This isn't
I
about
mean,
her.
you
It's
know.
about me.
It could be that, you know. Well, I was going to ask a follow-up question. Is part of minimalism that if you buy a thing, that you keep it for as long as possible? For example, like if you buy a smartphone, like particularly when iPhones first came out and there was a new one coming out every 2 years, right? So then it felt like, well, I have this phone, but I got to have that phone. And then, the new iPad's out, let me get that. Is a part of minimalism going, well, here's the car I have. I drive this car till the wheels fall off. Here's, the media, to your question, that I get. But instead of me getting the newest thing every time, I use this until it can't be used anymore. Does that play a role in your philosophy or not?
Yes and no. Like, I don't think there's any, I don't know of a set. Minimalism means I can't upgrade my phone when a new one comes out. I think upgrading my phone just to upgrade my phone is foolish if it doesn't solve more problems, right? Like, technology should solve more problems for us. So if technology isn't solving problems, it's only causing problems for us, and you can just get caught up in I have to have the new this and I have to have the new that. I don't think there's a lot of benefit to doing that, but that doesn't mean I have to drive a car until the wheels fall off necessarily. But I think minimalism does tend to stir up a little more contentment and a little more appreciation for the things that you already do have. I don't know. Once you kind of take your focus off all the things you don't have, I think you can appreciate more a little bit the things that you do have. But yeah, that'll look different to different people. A lot of good questions. This is fantastic, and a whole bunch more still coming. We'll get you next. Dave.
Hello.
Yes.
You mentioned the seasons of life changes with your children. When you first started, they were young. Now they're teens and tweens.
Yep.
My little ones are too little to have the conversation. So as they age, what do you talk about to explain that you may have fewer toys than your friends? Or no, we're not going to buy that. How do you have what can be a difficult conversation?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you're not the only one having the conversation with their kids, right? I had 2 10-year-olds in my back seat one time, and I knew them pretty well, and they were both pretty well off. One of them's dad had a Corvette, the other one's dad had a BMW, and they were jealous of each other. It was very funny. Like, the kid who had the BMW was jealous of the kid who had the Corvette, and the kid who had the Corvette was jealous of the dad who had the convertible BMW. And it just occurred to me that you can't outspend envy. Like, it doesn't matter how much you have, someone is always going to have more. And regardless of who your kid is, chances are 100% that there's always going to be someone else in school that has more of something or goes on better vacations than your kid does, right? So every parent is having that conversation with their kid, regardless if they're pursuing minimalism or not. That being said, I think every family gets to set the culture for their kids, and I'm a big fan of over-explaining to kids. Like, I think you should be able to explain to them why you're doing the things that you're doing, and so this is the conversation we have. You know what? We give fewer gifts at Christmas, but here's what we do with our money instead. We help build orphanages in Mexico. We travel in the summer. We go to more football games than other families do. Like, we've decided to use our money for other things, and explaining that, which doesn't always mean they understand it the first time or want to be okay with it, but I think if they can understand why, then it makes a little more sense. But I mean, adults need to hear the same thing. Like, adults are just as envious as kids are. And we're like, how do we help our kids not become envious? And I'm like, how do we help adults not become envious? It's the same thing. We feel confident about who we are and what we have. We're grateful for what we have. And I think the biggest way we overcome envy in our lives is we live a life aligned with our values. This I've come to see true. We overcome envy when we live a life aligned with our values. When I know I'm spending my days and I'm spending my money doing the things I want to do with it, then I don't care what my neighbor bought or what house they're moving into, because I know I'm living the life that I want to be living. And when we can be confident about that, it's when we're chasing all the things that we don't actually want to be chasing, that's when we get caught up in the, I wish I was living a different life.
What are some misconceptions about minimalism?
Yeah. I think we hit a few of them. Some of the misconceptions are that it's boring, that it's stark or barren. I think just the opposite is true, that minimalism is essentially about living a life of passion, to living a life focused on the things that matter most to you and dedicating more of your finite resources towards those things that actually matter. There's some misconception that minimalism is about checking out of life, and certainly there are some people who do that, who embrace minimalism so they can go lay on a beach for the rest of their lives. I don't think there's much joy in that, maybe for a couple weeks, but I don't think there's much joy in that in the long run. I pursue minimalism so that I can do my job better, so I can do what I feel God has called me to do with my life, right? I said pastor, so I get to insert that in there, right? Like, this is what I'm passionate about doing, and I want to do more of that. So there's those things. I think some people think it's about rules, and I can only own a certain number of things, that it's going to look the same from person to person. Those are some of the biggest misconceptions.
Other questions? Anybody? All right, you got a question? And then we'll come back here. Yeah.
Before you started that process, what was the thing that was most difficult for you to part with?
Yeah, and I always wish I had a better answer. I really wish I had a better answer. Honestly, the hardest thing, unless maybe I haven't gotten rid of it yet, is maybe the real case. Honestly, the hardest thing for me to do was the basement. And it wasn't because there was any one or specific thing. Because I know the things that are difficult for people. There's books, and there's sentimental items. There's arts, like yarn stash. I don't know. There's camping gear, right? Like, there's tools. There's like different things for different people that are hard for them to get rid of. There wasn't a lot that was difficult for me, other than just having to go through the entire basement and having to go through the boxes one by one, and all the time and commitment that went into that was very difficult. But I mean, as I started owning less, it became, okay, I've seen owning less benefit me in this area. Now, how am I going to embrace it here? And how am I going to apply it here? And how am I going to apply it to books? And how am I going to apply it to my stuff from high school and my trip to Israel? And like how all my wedding, we used all of our wedding napkins. Like it was a box we opened, and there's like 150 wedding napkins that we saved. Like we used them. We just put them in the pantry, and we used them for, I don't know, a couple of weeks, and it was kind of fun. I don't know.
Yeah, we had some other questions between the two of you here.
Okay, so I learned by examples. Can you humor me if I give you a super basic question? I definitely struggle with the kitchen the most. I think that's where the gadgets and the duplicates all are. What, basically, does your minimalist or a minimalist kitchen look like?
Okay. So the kitchen was one of the things I was most worried about. And then I stumbled across an article. Write this down because this will help you. A no-frills kitchen still cooks. A no-frills kitchen still cooks. It's by Mark Bittman, a New York Times article. And here's this
really great article.
Here's this world-class chef, and he basically made a list of 33 essential kitchen tools. And he said, if you have these 33 things, you can make anything made in any kitchen in the world. Basically, maybe that's a bit of an overstatement, but you can make almost anything you want with these 33 things. And it was like a light bulb moment for me. And so when I went to the kitchen, I grabbed each of the 33 things and I put them on the table, and then I had drawers and drawers and cabinets of stuff. And there were a few things that I'm like, no, I kind of like using the George Foreman grill. That was actually something we got rid of. But no, I actually still kind of use this. And so there were a few things that we held on to, but having that guide, and I just kept going back to, well, if this guy says I can make anything I want with these tools, then do I really have to keep this, and do I really have to do that? So that'll be very helpful to you.
Back to the sentimentality. It's coming. I want to make sure we capture it.
Yeah, you touched on the sentimentality. That's probably one of my biggest challenges.
Yep.
I can't part with a lot of things. And now that I have little kids, I want to preserve things for them. So do you create 2 boxes and whatever fits in there goes? What did you do? What did your wife do to make sure that when they look back, oh, you saved this for me, thank you?
Yeah, that's it exactly. That is it exactly. And it's the best tool for kids. Physical boundaries is very helpful for kids. How do I get my kids to minimize their toys? First thing, you don't start there. Do your own things first, and then ask your kids to go through their toys. And set a physical boundary of some sort. Hey, whatever toys that fit against this wall, you can keep, or in this closet, or in this toy chest, and then let them decide what to keep. Can be very helpful. Same thing with my daughter's artwork. There was a plastic bin that fit under her bed, one of those that slid under, and she loves art and crafts, and we just said, okay, you can keep whatever you want that fits in this bin. And then when the bin gets too full, we go back through it, and usually there's a little space, it takes a little while to fill up, and so you can go back and say, okay, this is a really meaningful piece, and this meant a lot to me, and I remember when you made this one, and those are the ones that we end up holding on to. But yeah, so those physical boundaries can be very helpful. I think they help us sort out kind of important from actually really, really important when we have to make the decision between them.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, what is the point of intersection between having less and actually being tidy? Because you don't necessarily get rid of everything if you need a lot of stuff. I'm an artist. I have a lot of supplies that I use constantly, but tidiness sometimes gets in the way.
Yeah.
So.
It's different. And it's the difference between going on a diet and losing weight and staying at that weight, right? Decluttering is a one-time action. Minimizing, you go through your house and you get rid of the stuff, but staying tidy is about what are the habits that I need to embrace in my life. What things do I need to do daily What things do I need to do weekly? What things do I need to do monthly or seasonally? And you number one, tidying is a lot easier when you own less. Like it becomes easier, you own less, and soon everything has a spot, everything has a place, everything has a home. And so it's easier to put things when you know where they're supposed to go, and there's not as much stuff that you're having to put away. But yeah, stuff still comes out and gets used. I discovered when we minimized our home, it was very interesting. I started noticing where clutter would collect on the counter, in the kitchen, on the dining room table, right when you walked in the door, there was a little end table. And like, when everything was cluttered, I couldn't identify those spots. But when we minimized things, I started to see, man, that spot, always, all the time, there's stuff there. And it just became like I just have to go through that every day, every couple days, and go through it and get it back. Otherwise, the clutter just attracts more clutter. But to someone who lives in a very cluttered home, this sounds, I could never reset my kitchen every single evening. Are you kidding? Like, no way. But then when you minimize your stuff, you find, actually, this isn't so hard. I never knew I could tidy my kitchen in a few minutes every single night before I go to bed.
That's great. Other questions here?
So you've written about minimalism with kids. I'm not quite at that stage yet, so I'm wondering what you would have to say on the topic of minimalism with babies. I'm expecting my first in November.
Minimalism with babies. First and foremost, don't buy into everything that babies are us. Is babies are us still a thing? Just don't buy into the assumption that you need to have everything that they tell you that you need to have. Certainly I assume you're married, and so your wife will have some opinions about things, and I would listen to her. As the mom, I would refrain from, you don't need that, we're not going to get it. If she wants it, I would do what I can to get it. But yeah, I wouldn't buy into that. I would, because we fall into a trap very quickly with as soon as kids come, and like it's overnight, and we've got all this stuff, and we're spending all this money, and suddenly our house gets filled, and every room gets filled with baby stuff, and I don't know, that we need to be spending more time with the baby, and we're just buying more stuff to have to take care of. So I don't have a no frills nursery still works for babies. That'd be a great article for someone to write. The bare essentials. Maybe you could find it online. But
any other questions? Yeah.
Congratulations, by the way.
I was thinking, what are some of the things you say to yourself early in the morning, or habits that you have, daily habits, to set yourself up for success, to live a life focused on the essential and consuming less?
I don't know if it is as easy as here are a few things that I say to myself, or a few things that we say to ourselves. I think that the minimizing process is difficult, and it becomes very emotional. A lot of difficult questions surface. Why did I waste so much money on this? Why can't I part with it? Why did I buy all this in the first place? Like, there are a lot of difficult questions that come up during the process. I think that those are all valuable, and those are not unique. I think some people, those difficult questions emerge, and then they stop the process. And I always say, don't stop when all the good stuff is about to happen. It's like when we learn those things about ourselves is when we're able to make the changes going forward. I encourage people to remember why they wanted to minimize. When I wrote my book, The More of Less, I wanted to call it Becoming Minimalist, but my publisher wouldn't let me name it that. And she said, because becoming minimalist isn't the promise, becoming minimalist is the process that gets you to something. Where does minimalism get you? What is the promise? That's what you should name the book. And so when we're minimizing, it's helpful to remember that the goal isn't to own less. The goal is to spend more time and money on this thing that I want to be doing with my life. And so reminding myself, this is why I'm doing it, so I can do more of that going forward. And then, I mean, as far as like overcoming consumerism then becomes I think it's a different journey, but I think as we see the benefits of owning less, as we see how it has benefited our life, as we practice gratitude and generosity, as we begin to notice how much lies society is feeding us about what we need to buy and why we should buy it and who's, where the advertisements come from, realizing our money can be worth more than the things that we're spending it on, that our life can actually make a difference. Our money can make a difference in the world. Our money can solve problems in the world that we're passionate about. I think the more we see that and notice that, then the less inclined we are to buy things like a bigger screen television when I could help send someone to college. Or probably not college for a big screen television. College has gotten a little expensive. But man, you could send some kid in developing nation to school for a long time for the price of a bigger screen television. Anyway, that's a little more than I needed to say.
Last question.
Last
from
question.
You.
Are we doing on
You'll
time?
close us out.
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, one more.
Beautiful.
See, I've been trying to become a minimalist unsuccessfully for a little while
all
now.
right, well, let's do it. Let's get there.
You mentioned a pod earlier. The thought of putting stuff in a pod and hauling it off to the trash dump seems so wrong environmentally. Do you take it to Goodwill? Do you host a garage sale? Like, how do you slowly purge all this stuff and be responsible?
Yeah. The best thing you can do is find a local charity that you believe in and donate items there. It becomes, generosity is not just the byproduct of minimalism, it can also become the motivation for it. My daughter was 2, my son was 5. We had passed out the maternity, we weren't gonna have any more kids. And so we had all this stuff in the basement, maternity clothes and baby stuff and even like young infant, toddler stuff. And we were getting rid of it. None of it sold at the garage sale. I called the CareNet Pregnancy Center in Burlington, Vermont that my neighbor worked at, Lori. I called Lori and I'm like, hey, I know you work at the CareNet Pregnancy Center. We've got all this baby stuff. Do you want it? I mean, would you guys take that? And I'll never forget her response because it went something like this. Yeah, that's literally what we do. Like, we literally take donations and we give them to single moms, families in poverty, people who've decided to keep keep the baby and don't know how they're going to make ends meet. Like, this is what we do. And I'm like, I guess it never dawned on me that there was such a need in my community. And we went in the basement and we found even more. Like, more boxes, like more stuff. Oh man, there's someone in my neighborhood who needs this stuff today and it's just in my basement on a shelf? How foolish of me. And so, like, finding that motive, we found the Vermont Refugee Resettlement Program that was taking housewares and getting families set up in apartments and became very motivating for us. There's a time and a space for just taking things to Goodwill. I'm not against Goodwill like some people are. They job training and they do help. They do good work, and maybe they're not quite as efficient as some of the other charities, but I think there's a time and space for doing that as well. Some people get caught up in I can't find anything, I can't find nowhere to donate this, and I can't recycle it, but I don't want to put it in the landfill. That can actually become a stumbling block for some people, and I try to tell them, look, that thing is a thing. Like, that thing is going to be a thing somewhere. If it can't be recycled and it can't be donated, the resources have been pulled out of the earth. Like, it is a thing, and either it's going to live in your basement or it's going to live in your landfill. Like, put it in the landfill. Like, it's going to end up there when you die. At some point, it's going to end up there. And certainly we don't need to be reckless or irresponsible, but holding on to junk in our house isn't any different than putting it in the landfill. Actually, it's probably better in the landfill where the professionals are keeping track of it.
Can we show our Plywood Presents love for
To
Joshua Becker?